Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Matson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace. Okay, so we serve leaders, and so many of us in leadership roles have been taught to push past our limits, to give it our all, to produce, no pain, no gain. You might have heard these messages in your gym. You sometimes hear it in our churches. And we're like, if you're not serving and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, then do you really love Jesus? And there's this idea that sometimes doing more is more godly, more of a better leader. And we really need to pause and think about the messages that we are not only taking in ourselves, but we're passing on to our children and our organizations, and the ways that we're pushing past our design. And one of the ways I love to quote this man, Jeff Matson, in our leadership cohorts, we always talk about a healthy, wholehearted leader learns to appreciate their limits. And so we have someone really special with us today who has written a book about what it means to actually honor our limitations as human beings and how that actually might create an even more holistic and actually, I think, more productive life actually in the end.
Yeah, so Sara Hagerty is a best-selling author and Jesus follower. She's the wife and mother of 7, 4 adopted from Africa and 3 through miracle pregnancies. Her first book, Every Bitter Thing is Sweet, from 2014, ponders the conflict inherent when life's expectations do not meet up with reality. And her latest book, The Gift of Limitations, Finding Beauty in Your Boundaries, from March 2024, coming up, illustrates how our greatest weaknesses are the doorway to rich intimacy with God. Sara and her family live in Missouri. And Sara, it's so good to have you with us today.
Oh, I'm totally honored to be on. Thank you.
Well, we love to start with story time, like helping our audience really understand the context of your message and a little bit about you and your story and how it's shaping what you're doing today.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, so in terms of my limitations, I feel like I've been up against them since I was in my 20s. I probably had them before, but I think our 20s tend to be the decade where I'm going to change the world meets, oh my, there's 24 hours in a day.
Right.
So in my 20s, I was married relatively young and very determined to do full-time ministry and change the world for God, and hit both really spiritual ministry burnout. And my husband and I walked through a long season of infertility. So very young, from my perspective, we were introduced to our limitations, to what my body just wouldn't and couldn't do, for what my heart and even my time in terms of my vision for ministry couldn't do. And what I didn't know then that I know now is that actually became sort of a cyclical message in my life, that I would bump up against a fence line that God had allowed. And somehow in that process, over and over again, find that the grass underneath my feet and the fruit in the trees in my yard and the sky right above me was actually the best place to be.
Yeah, you're speaking to limitations many don't think about growing up, or often we're not told about. But even just dreaming of a big family and then realizing, oh, there are some limitations, and that not everybody is able to just have a kid when they say they want to have a kid. And so there's physical limitations, there's emotional, and there's even spiritual limitations that you're speaking to.
So let's talk a little bit about the idealism and idealism that maybe you had in your story, but also is so common for all of us to have, especially as followers of Jesus. Hope is a real and beautiful thing, but and idealism can be healthy in some respects. But talk a little bit about where that goes off in off rails, if you will, and becomes sort of negative, and how it even influenced you. What role does the grieving process even play in that when you're identifying healthy limitations?
Yeah, idealism, in many ways, Jesus was ideal. Like as we look at scripture and the hope for the future and eternity, that is ideal. But at times it can verge, not Jesus himself, but our interpretation of it can verge into fixing our eyes on the ideal at the expense of what's right in front of us. And I was a new believer in my 20s, like had just become a believer when I was a teenager. And so was full of just what my life was going to look like in God. My husband and I are both very leadership oriented. We are leaders. And so how we were going to impact our ministry world, even our neighborhood, our gym, we had these perspectives on what our life was going to look like and not a whole lot of life experience. And then as we started to hit these limitations, like I talked about with my infertility, my dad was diagnosed with cancer and he died young also. I experienced that at a young age. We started to realize, and we would keep reaching for these ideals. Like it was like in our mind, we would be faced with a reality of something we couldn't have, like a fence line in our life. And we would keep reaching for these ideals. And it was slowly over time that we started to realize, like in reaching for the ideals at the expense of paying attention to what's right in front of us, our hearts are slowly dying in God.
And I like that you use the fence line metaphor. I mean, I grew up in kind of agricultural mindset, and I'd love to still pursue the outdoors. Sometimes you come up against a fence line and a boundary, and you have to make some decisions about that line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, is that barbed wire? How bad is that?
Yeah.
Like, can I climb over that?
Yeah. And you get asking permission of landowners is an important thing if you would want to cross that line. But just like it is in seeking our Father's permission and why He may have put some fence lines in our lives to discover. It's out of love that He does these things. And noticing, and it sounds like that it was a journey of noticing for both you and your husband. And as leaders, it seems like in so many messages that we get in leadership culture and in the church, it's about overcoming fence lines, like crossing over. You're not going to let anything stop you. And we're hearing wisdom here from you as to say, no, maybe there's something right where you are underneath your feet.
But let's talk a little bit about the voices that people are thinking of. Wait. What about pushing past your limits in a way that are good? Like, what about challenges and how often sometimes we think we're not capable? What about we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, even though that's taken out of context a lot of times. So speak to that, Sara, because I can hear those listening going, I'm confused. Like our limits, sometimes they're from the devil. So talk about that piece.
You mentioned it. I think there's a key in paying attention to ourselves, to our bodies, to our hearts. There's not a playbook for life in God. There is in the Bible, but we know that God teaches us through story, right? And so in some ways we want here's the next play I need to do, when in reality there is a paradox. Life in God is nebulous at times. And I think our bodies and our hearts tell more of a story as to whether these are limits we actually need to accept and receive as God-given, or whether these are limits He's putting in front of us and saying, now it's time to be an overcomer. I think our limitations really in many ways create a resentment inside of us, but we don't even know it because we don't pay attention. We just keep trying to overcome. We assume that the playbook says overcome. Always overcome, hustle, move faster, try harder. And so we run that play again and again, when in reality, there are times where God is saying, well, your body is really, really tired. I'm speaking to you through your body. You're missing people in your life, and you're running over the people who are closest to you to get to that, to overcome. And there are ways in our life that we can pay attention to signposts saying, hey, maybe this isn't a limit to overcome. Maybe it's one to actually pay attention to that you're resenting and need to receive as a gift.
I love that. You're alluding to the idea of maybe paying attention to our physical bodies and also our emotional parts of us that shows up in our bodies. So let's talk about emotions a little bit and how they can be, even in the Christian circles. I hear a lot of times people will think that emotion don't follow your heart, which is a biblical principle, but it didn't mean that emotions are really what it's talking about. Emotions are actually the signals, the signs on the dashboard that help us to pay attention to what is going on underneath. So talk a little bit about emotions and how those played a role in your own journey of discovering limits and seeing the signposts for when God was saying it's time for rest.
I think I came from that perspective that emotions, in many ways, in my mind, emotions were dangerous.
Mhm.
And I sort of created a theology around that because ultimately, if I'm honest, it was safer for me not to explore my emotions. Sometimes I think we do that where we can develop theologies around certain things when in actuality, it's just inside. We're scared to go there. We don't want to go there. That feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. And emotions very much were that for me until I got married. Actually, marriage sort of, my husband and I joke, I mean, it's now 22 years, so we can joke about these things. And we do say we fell in love at 10 years into marriage. So we have a lot of stories.
Mhm.
But really, it was like the core came off of my emotions. I all of a sudden had this safe person, and it was so messy and big. And I had been so steady for most of my early Christian life and my young adult life. And here I was now married, and I was uncorked. And I didn't know what to do with my emotions because I had spent so much time ignoring them. And yet I look at the Bible and God is an emotional God. And we see that. I mean, the Psalms, like, why would he give us the Psalms if we weren't to be ones who pay attention to our emotions? My God, why have you forsaken me?
Mhm.
I mean, we see that Jesus using those words on the cross. So I started to realize, oh, my emotions actually are important. They're a gauge for what's happening inside of me. They're actually a little bit of a breadcrumb trail to find out what's going on the interior of my heart. And the more that I pay attention to them, actually, the more that they calm. Weirdly, the more I give attention to my emotions, in some ways we get scared. We don't want to pay attention to them because we're going to give them so much power. In reality, the more I paid attention to them and brought them before God, the more I started to find myself being less anxious,
Mhm.
less fearful, less dreadful, those sorts of things.
I love it. You're speaking to the idea that we stop fearing the emotions itself. I always picture them like a little 3-year-old. And the more
Yeah.
you ignore, the louder they get and the more obnoxious, mommy, 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 mommy. Okay. And
I mean, I have a 4-year-old, so that's like was my morning,
that's
I also
exactly.
have a 20-year-old, but I have a 4-year-old, and it's very
It's
real. That's it
very real.
absolutely
But when you get down on your knees and you look that little 4-year-old in the eye and say, "Oh, honey, I
years.
see you," they calm down. We get them focused. We give them something to do, or we care and comfort them. And then all of that, mommy, 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 calms down. So it's the same with emotions. But it does take a little energy and an effort to do that.
Well, and especially with ourselves, and for many of us, like we've maybe had decades of not paying attention to them, so it feels unfamiliar to start to go, wait, my emotions might be telling a story worth paying attention to and worth talking to God about.
Yeah. So, I'm a counselor, Sarah. So my thought goes, okay, that's what us counselors do a lot of in helping, but maybe speak outside of counseling. What were some of the ways that you begin to pay attention and care for your emotions? One I heard was maybe talking and processing with your husband, a safe person.
Yeah.
That's new for many people, but you went there and let him go there with you. Were there anything else that you can name for our listeners to say, okay, I'm scared to go to my emotions, but I know they're yelling at me and I need to pay attention. What else can I do?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things for me right now. I mean, it changes season to season right now. I've been practicing a daily office, which I hesitate to even call it that because I know there's like a term and a methodology, and I don't necessarily know that I follow the methodology, but several times a day, just taking a pause to sit in silence before God, to open the word, let the word engage with my heart where I am, being honest. If I'm reading like Psalm 16:6, your boundary lines for me have fallen in pleasant places. And I'm sitting there like, my girlfriends are all going on a trip this weekend and there's no way I can leave with this many kids. Like, I don't feel like these boundaries are pleasant. Like having that honest dialogue with God. I mean, it's 10 minutes for me. In the morning, I spend a little bit longer, but mid afternoon and in the evening, just placing a pause in my life where instead of just running to my phone or reaching in the fridge, I go, okay, let me just pay attention to the last 3 hours. And what do I notice? I noticed I grabbed my phone a lot. I noticed I was, snapping at my kids, or I noticed that I was very preoccupied. There were things happening in front of me and I couldn't engage with them. So let me trace that back to what's the emotion going on inside of me that I can bring to God and dialogue with God about.
I love that.
Yeah, I love it as well. I mean, you're talking really about a relationship, the relationship with God, our primary relationship, our relationship with others. And in this case, your husband, your kids, and then anybody else for that matter, outside of those spaces where you're turning towards and you're taking inventory throughout the day. A couple times you said you called it an office fast. Did I hear that right?
It's a term, and I think it was, formulated by the Desert Fathers. It's called the daily
The
office.
daily office.
Um,
Okay.
I think in the Anglican circles, they practice that more often, but it's just a chance to sit in silence. And then for me to engage with God's word. And it's 10 minutes. I mean, it's 2 minutes of silence, 5 minutes of back and forth with God's word and my emotions, and 2 minutes of silence again.
What's so great about that is that it might seem like, wow, you do that every day. Well, it's probably not a legalism, but it's like the idea is that you're doing it a lot more than you would if you didn't if you didn't have that intention, right? And it gives you some perspective. Do you notice that you mentioned that it calms you down? It gives you perspective to trace back emotion, and it allows you to live with greater integrity and freedom. It sounds like, and do you feel more
Absolutely.
whole because of that and have that rhythm in place?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know that I would say that that's the golden nugget, but in general, I think giving myself space to connect with my emotions and really to connect with my limits, to connect with how my limits are impacting my emotions. Because a lot of times I live with a low grade resentment about those limitations. I'm looking over the fence line and not even paying attention to it, dreaming of it being in a different season or dreaming of when my life is going to be simpler. When I have that space in place to actually pay attention to my emotions and pay attention to what my limits, how they're impacting my emotions, I feel like it's a clearing of the cache. This anxiety can build up inside of us and we don't even notice that. Some of us have such a high tolerance for anxiety that we live here until we crack. And I think this is it almost feels like a multiple day clearing of the cache where I go, oh, whoo, let's see what's in there. Look under the hood. What's in there? What needs to be touched or addressed? And then go back to my day. And then I know in a couple of hours, I'm going to do it again rather than it being this day by day buildup.
Yeah, and ignoring and shoving them down. And then you have the volcano explosion and the side effects where we're doing something, we're yelling at the grocery store clerk and going, where did that come from? If we want to help our kids develop a lasting faith, we need to be teaching them about Jesus in our homes. Parents are so important in raising kids to know, love, and follow Jesus, but it's hard to know where to start sometimes. There's a lot of amazing content out there, and Christian Parenting did all the sorting and filtering for you, and they put together a resource to help you navigate it all. It's called the Discipleship Simplified. It's a digital guide that includes some of the best articles, podcasts, and videos on topics like faith at home, reading the Bible, theology, prayer, church and worship, and character. You'll also find conversation guides and discussion starters, even scripts that you can use with your kids. So if you've ever wondered, what do I say when my kid doesn't want to go to church? Well, Discipleship Simplified has a script for that. If you want to know how to weave scripture and conversation about faith into your everyday life, well, Discipleship Simplified has ideas for that too. So since this guide is digital, you can download it straight to your phone, your computer, or you can even search through the resources. Whatever you need, it's there. I know this guide will be helpful every time you have a question about discipling your kids and giving you further insight on how to care and love and guide them towards Jesus. You can go to cpgive.org to download your copy for just $5. That's the best of this best resource from top Christian parenting contributors for just $5. Again, go to cpgive.org. So our Wholehearted Leadership Cohort applications are opening in January. We are so excited to come alongside another 10 to 12 leaders. We just want to clarify what this cohort is about, why it's worth it, and maybe get rid of some of those myths or misnomers out there that are keeping you from moving forward. So a couple things we talk about in Shrinking the Integrity Gap is that leadership is lonely. This is providing a really intentional community to be able to dive deeper and to build safety, to practice the principles, what we're building through Shrinking the Integrity Gap and the Wholehearted Leadership Cohort, to practice those in a safer community with us guides, Jeff and Tara, and then to be able to take those into your organizations, into your home. And we believe that happens through that slow and steady drip. And at the end of this cohort, you will be living from your design and knowing what you're to say yes to so that you can be confident in all your no's and to learn how to live out of priorities and not out of urgency. We all know that as leaders, but to actually have the practice to do that, it's coming from a trauma-informed neurobiological pathway of saying the slow and steady experiential shifts are what changes us. So you get 15 individual coaching sessions. You get 4 two-day retreats in the beautiful Willamette Valley of Oregon. And you also get 20 group coaching sessions with Jeff and I and our Living Wholehearted coaches. It's an exceptional package. Maybe you're not ready for the cohort, then pick up our book, Shrinking the Integrity Gap. You can also pick up our e-course and start there and be ready. Pray next January, we will open up the gates again. So if you are ready, or this is pulling at your heartstrings, or you're kind of thinking already systemically of someone else in your wake who might be a good fit for this, go to livingwholehearted.com, and right at the top, you'll see the cohort there, and applications open in January. We will select and let those leaders know in February, and we will get launched and moving for March. It's such a great gift to come alongside leaders, helping them live with integrity from the inside out, bringing all of who they are, their mind, their body, their heart, their soul, and their relationships before God and before one another. Okay, my turn for a question, okay? Because I don't want to go past this piece before we keep diving, but what are the voices? You keep saying, and it's common for all of us who are a bit drivers, that, kind of want to go and do things for God, which is a theology danger that a lot of us believe that we're doing for God rather than God being with us and it being his outcome and flow. But what are some of those things that have been influencing the angst that, particularly for you, but maybe put words for other people, where we get disappointed with our limits or frustrated with the boundaries that have fallen? What are the voices, either culturally or maybe certain personality types? But speak to that a little bit, Sarah, so we can put some meat on the skeleton of what we're talking about.
I think for me, and probably for all of us, I have the internal happening and then the external. So internally, I think of my dad who hiked the Grand Canyon on a whim with only a Diet Coke in his hand. Yeah. And I don't know if y'all have been to the Grand Canyon, but that's something that people train for a long time. My dad didn't, and he just did it on a whim, and that's in my blood. It's in me to overcome and to do the hard things and to press through even when it feels too hard. So that's some of my story that I bring into this. Is my dad was my hero, and he actually eventually very much succumbed to physical limitations and died a young death of cancer. But for much of my life, what I witnessed was, if you hit hard, you overcome. And he didn't actually ever say that, but as a young girl, we just witness our parents. And so inside of me was this: if it's hard, doesn't matter. Like, you ignore your limits in essence to overcome. But then I think externally, I have, you spend 10 minutes on Instagram and everybody's got filters and Botox and lashes and all the things. And those are my dear friends. So I'm not saying anything negative about those, but the reality is we can overcome our aging. We can overcome our wrinkles. We can overcome our time limits, because you see someone who's dressed super cute and doing something in a day, and you're not seeing necessarily the hard parts of their life. And so I think culturally there's an environment of ever optimization. Like, anything you bump up against, there's an opportunity to circumvent it, go around it, go over it. And I just think culturally, even from a time perspective, there's no limits on your phone. I can be anywhere in the world in 1 minute. I can see anything. I can communicate with 10 people at once. I can travel to different places in my heart too as I watch these things. And so I think as it translates into my everyday life, then, my limits here feel like, come on, surely there's got to be a way around this.
I think that
Yeah.
something that comes to my mind too, just as you're sharing, Sarah, is the wisdom of the Apostle Paul, where he says everything is permissible, not everything is beneficial. I mean, that's really a rootedness in the message that we're talking about here. I mean, you can do anything here with technology as it advances, and it continues, and it will continue. What is healthy? What is good? What is right? What is
That's right.
pure? What is helpful? These kinds of things are messages that I think that people are longing for, they're craving as they get burned out and weary, because with all
Mhm.
these opportunities and the expectations that come with them, it is the hamster wheel. It is, and I think a younger generation is starting to see that. They're starting to see that some of the messages
Mhm.
that were propped up for them weren't true. And how are you connecting this with your own kids? Like, we think about that you're raising up and seeing what the messages that they're hearing, and how to help them see even beyond that, underneath that, so that they can also benefit from these things.
It's interesting because I think I've got teenagers, and how do y'all have kids? How
Yeah.
old are your
Yeah,
kids?
but they're 15 and 17.
Yes, the teenage years, in some ways, I feel like so much of what they're learning is by observation more than what we're actually. I mean, I would love to give them sermons every day, but the reality is so much of what they're learning is by what they're observing. And so Nate and I are just very much aware of letting our kids see that we sometimes have to let people down, and that we don't have our phones with us all the time, and that there's really great opportunities out there that we're not always taking. I think it's different than maybe the generation, when we were kids, where I think our parents wanted to present us with all the opportunities and have us see you can take on the world. I think we're just sowing more into our life that they can witness, and our lives with them, saying, you know what, you don't have to take on the world. You can have a slow launch out of high school. It's okay to not know what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
yet. And it's okay to let your friends down if you can't do all the things. And it's okay to, if you did this one thing for 3 or 4 years and it just doesn't feel like a fit, you're not a quitter if you leave. And so I think in many ways, we're just trying to be gentle with them in a way that our own selves need a gentleness.
I love it, which is in line with God's grace of meeting us where we're at, and using using our emotions, using our
Mhm.
physical bodies and the stages of life where we're at, the limitations, just even of finances, and the reality
Yeah.
of. I think also the other thing, when you were talking about Instagram and looking to the other side, I always think contextually, we have no clue all of the things that they have. So, Sarah, not to compare our lives, but I'm thinking you've got 7 kids, I have 2. And, and the things that maybe I can do and have time and free time for, you're not
Mhm.
going to, because you have 7 children, right? And I might not know that about you, and you might not know that about me. And so what we're comparing is not always fair. Or I think about comparing to a 25-year-old who's not married yet, and then, somebody who's more seasoned in life and just at a different stage and wants something different. But God's got a voice in our life. He's trying to speak up and to say, this is good. So going back to what you were saying earlier of the sky above and the walls around me, there's good in what is, and not always looking
Mm.
for what is not. So
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what you hope that your listeners or your readers get from this book at the end of the day when they pick it up. What's the outcome you hope for and pray for them?
I think my hope is that they would see that the things that they're resenting are actually a gift,
Mm.
and that God gives us limitations on purpose. And that even some of our greatest Christian efforts towards interceding that our limits would be removed, or bettering ourselves so that we could be overcomers that we think God wants us to be, actually might be relatively fruitless in light of a God who wants us to just accept the limits that he gives us. My hope is that people would see that limitations are a gift, that limitations are the way of God saying, me as your leader and your dad, I know what's best. And so what feels like an impenetrable fence line is actually an attempt from me to have you look at the beauty that's right in front of you.
Mm.
So my hope would be joy. I mean, I feel like even since writing the book, I turned in the manuscript to my book and was diagnosed with Lyme disease. Like the irony
Sarah.
having a much greater limit placed on my life literally right after I turned in this manuscript. And for me to go, oh Lord, like, here's my chance. Am I going to actually see that this is true? And I can say, however many months later, almost a year later, yeah, there's life and joy to be found when we have profound limits put on our life. And there is a God saying the fence line is on purpose.
That was a big one that you just dropped, that you got diagnosed with Lyme disease. And I know that there's so many things that we're going down the road and then we get hit by something that just takes us for a completely different turn. Talk about what that was like for you and what grounded you. I mean, you wrote a whole book on accepting your limits, but unpack that a little bit for us if you're willing.
Well, I think, the diagnosis itself actually felt like a period at the end of a sentence rather than a new sentence, because I had been sick for a year and a half it was a big mystery to me. So in some ways, finding out what it was for some people, I think felt like, and for me, I felt like, I think I'm on a path here then, rather than just the ambiguous nature of being sick. But really, practically, I was sick for much of the summer. I am on a healing road right now, but for much of the summer, I heavy fatigue and in bed. And I mean, time after time, feeling like I was allowing God to preach to me the message that I feel like he's been having me live my whole life, which is, you're going to see how beloved you are when you can't produce. I want you to see how much I love you when your kids are on the other side of the door and you're not taking care of them. I want you to see how much I love you when you're not able to follow through with all the things that you thought you would follow through with, takeout dinners. And I still love you, Sarah. So in some ways, I just felt like, in retrospect, I can go, yeah, it was painful. I don't want to minimize that. But maybe it's also the fruit of having been on this road for 2 decades. This wasn't my first rodeo. Yeah. I think if it was my first rodeo, and I remember my first rodeo with infertility, I kicked a lot. Like, this is terrible. This time around, I went, I know you're allowing this. And not that I'm still praying for God to heal me. I know you're allowing this, and I want to receive what you have for me in it, because I know that we spend a lot of extra energy fighting against the fence lines, when if I could get there quicker and just go, okay, you're allowing it, and what do you have on the inside of this fence? I feel like I started to really find it. So I can honestly say I got to test it out, and it works.
Street credibility. You've got it, Sarah.
Yeah, that really is a bit of the maturing process for all of us, that we be able to accept the journey and the stories and trust our God with whatever is at the fence line. So
and I don't want to share, I want to be careful to say, I think it's really important that we don't skip steps. I think many times we know the language, and so we preach ourselves into a better place, and we don't actually get there emotionally. So I don't want to just say, oh, it wasn't hard. I mean, I cried a lot, like a lot of shed tears over, this isn't what I thought this stage of my life would be. My husband and my son were also diagnosed with Lyme. So we're very much facing this as a family. It's not that there is not pain. The pain is really real. But I think we're able to cycle through the pain a little bit more. Like, it's not the surface. I'm not burying it beneath layers and layers. It's there. And I'm daily going, here's what's hard. I've got a kid who's sick in bed. This is what's hard, God. And allowing him to touch me there.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you so much for that healthy vulnerability. I mean, it is powerful to hear that you had lived a lot of life through circumstances that were not easy, and God was developing this message. You saw that he was doing that, and you wrote this book, and new challenges emerged even through it and are still present. And these are the choices that you're making. You're making the choice to say, I'm looking for the gifts of what is right now, even through this, and that you have from me, God. And you, your faith is inspirational in that way. And the fact that you're journeying together with your husband and your family in the present, like I said, brings street credibility in so many ways. So thank you for that. And I know that many people are going to be encouraged to hear this message today. Leave our listeners with I guess maybe one last piece of encouragement, and then share with them where they can find resources and connect to you.
I think the one last piece of encouragement is a verse that I've hung on to quite a bit, which is Paul saying, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, because his power is made perfect in my weakness. And I think the older I get, the more that I feel like weak is the new strong. And weak is actually weak and limited and not able to produce at the capacity that I used to, that I once thought was terrible, actually feels to me like the new wise and the new strong. And so I'm looking for opportunities. It's interesting to sort of mine your life for weakness and go, here's actually where God gets to radiate the most through my life, and to see it happen. And so you can find me. My book is coming out, The Gift of Limitations. It's anywhere where books are sold, and if people pre-order before it comes out in March, they can get a digital copy, and also access to. I write regularly and a lot more candidly on Substack. So they could get access to 3 free months of Substack if they pre-order the book. I'm at sarahagerty.net, and I'm on Instagram at Sara Hagerty Writes.
I love your heart, Sarah, and you're the kind of leader we speak about, a wholehearted leader who's really come face to face to knowing that her identity is really wrapped in what her father sees her, and how being who you are is so much greater than what you do. So much of your message is right in line with our heartbeat at Living Wholehearted. We just encourage you to go pick this book up. And well, again, we're starting our year talking about learning how to pace ourselves and not being on the hamster wheel or the rat race or the treadmill where you can't press stop, and learning how to enjoy what is, even if there are enormous limitations and things that we really don't want from a human level in our lives, but God is using them to draw us near to Him and to one another as people. So thank you, Sarah, for your time today.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been great.
Oh, good. Well, and if you're interested in learning more about Living Wholehearted, you can go to livingwholehearted.com. Pass this on to someone else that really needs this encouragement, this reminder, and definitely leave a review. It helps others find Living Wholehearted. And check out, if you're not listening to this on YouTube, check it out. We're now live on YouTube. So you can go watch this whole interview and see all the awkward faces and kind of side looks that we have here and there. So thank you, Sarah. And until next time, we hope that you continue to grow in becoming the leader that you would follow. So that was a fun conversation with Sarah, and just really loved her heart. We wanted to just talk a little bit more about our identity, and then how we help our kids and those that we're leading really pick up this message that our identity isn't wrapped up in productivity and producing, and more about in being, and being loved by the God who doesn't need us to do it all.
Yeah, I like the fact that she mentioned, she and her husband, that they are super intentional about the modeling. She mentioned she'd like to give a lecture on everything that, a spiritual lesson.
We don't
a
do
lecture.
that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know, how that would work, but no, but just really intentional about what they're modeling, what their behaviors are, because they know that their kids are picking that up. They've got 7 kids between 4 and 20, I think, if I remember that right. So yeah, we try to do this as well. We've got 17, 15-year-old girls. And so
no, we don't have 17 girls. We have a 17-year-old
17-year-old and a 15-year-old girl. Okay, yeah.
Woo, I panicked there for a moment.
and we're trying to be intentional with that too. It's the modeling piece, and right now they're in school. They're in a space where they're in high school, and it's like on all cylinders, right? There's challenging academics, there's athletics and schedule, and
there's church stuff.
And talking to them, I mean, it'd be easy, of course, to praise at all points in time, and that be, that's a good thing to praise things that they do and accomplish and achieve, and grade point averages and things. But we don't want that. We want that to be subordinate, secondary to the kinds of praise for who they are, not just what they do, right?
Yeah, so it comes out in some of the basic play therapy principles really are helping us as parents teach our children that who they are and affirming who they are is more important to us. So simple things like when you watch a game, maybe a sports or a dance or a music recital, instead of affirming like, that was so good, or giving them feedback on where they could have got done better, that's about growing their productivity. You affirm, I love watching you. It's so fun. It brings joy to my heart to just see you play. And then going for character affirmations like, you're such a good teammate. I saw how you picked up that girl who you pushed down to the floor in the basketball game, and how you helped her up. that said a lot about you as a person more than your game. So you're grabbing onto character moments, and you're also talking about delighting in them, and also finding time, which is really hard for a lot of us parents when we're uncomfortable with emotions and white space, finding time to just do nothing together. Whether that's putting out a puzzle and just doing a puzzle, it could be sometimes even watching a show together would be fine. But it's laying in bed and listening, giggling, laughing, talking about nothing,
Like when
and
you
not
do
having,
tuck-ins and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
but just really being intentional as a parent to join your kids into their world and to be a part of their world without having it turn into a lecture or a teaching time, which I have a tendency to like wrap everything into some sort of this is God's design. And my
It's
girls
so
roll their
efficient,
eyes.
honey. You're so efficient in this.
Well, everything has an analogy for me, somewhere in life. So, but those are a couple principles that we use in play therapy that can be helpful for us parents when we're trying to really build an identity from the inside out.
One of the things that I've witnessed recently that I really appreciate that you do is, especially with our youngest, who is more feeling orientated, sensory orientated, and less. Just needs to kind of flow relationally in talking about things.
It can get
Doesn't
awkward fast if I don't let it flow.
Yeah, but you, in my presence and with intention, have asked her, "Hey, so what are you feeling about things right now, like life as a freshman?" And you then start listening, and she maybe starts out kind of slow, or like, but then just the words start coming and things start coming out, and she feels like she's able to be, we can be a safe presence for her sharing those insights, and she feels better after that. And that's so on purpose and so intentional. Every kid wants to be noticed and seen, and have that with their parents, I think, in some respects. But that's a beautiful thing. How would you approach our oldest, who's wired so differently? In the same in for the same outcomes, but differently.
I actually would ask her the same question. She just might come at it from more of a cognitive place than more of an emotive place. And I think the key here is going back to what Sarah was saying about making room for our emotions. It's just easy for us as families, especially in Western culture, high capacity leader families, to be doing all the time, to be going on a schedule, to be feeling awkward if we're not producing or having something to do. And so going towards emotions is actually a new skill for a lot of us. So practically, I often encourage families to have kind of gets cheesy, but it's great as using the soul words from Yurkovich's How We Love. You can go to their website, you can print it out. We use it in the Courageous Girls curriculum. And I often have my leaders, when I'm doing executive coaching with them, print it out, put it on the refrigerator, and then practice every once in a while having everybody go up and just identifying where they're at on the feeling chart right now and talking about why they're there and being okay with being there, that it's a kind of a limit being emotional beings. It's a limitation Sarah was talking about, of being able to accept that. We don't have to be happy and joyful all the time, that we don't always have to know what we feel. And sometimes we need to look at a chart.
So the chart helps us to expand our emotional capacity and our feeling words,
It's
right?
practice.
It's I'll just say that for a guy in general, that's actually been very helpful to have
Yeah.
new words to describe things other than just I feel angry or
Hungry.
That
is an emotional word for
to expand the vocabulary and to do that in the company of my wife and my daughters. It helps us to feel like we're connecting, and that everybody wants to feel that with their family.
You're actually really good at identifying emotions, but it has come from lots of practice,
lots of reps.
And honestly, if you don't know a lot of emotional words, you can just stick with the basics.
Yeah.
Sad, happy, angry, and disappointed can be some that you'll just notice. So here's a task that all of us, a homework assignment for all of us. Is that okay if I give one?
That's great.
We're talking about learning to not produce, but I'm giving you a homework assignment to practice how to not produce. Is just noticing where you are. So I loved Sarah's check in with just a couple 2 to 10 minutes a day, but also just asking every day, what emotion primarily do I feel today? You can do it in a prayerful posture of asking the Holy Spirit, where do I feel? What do I feel? Or you can just literally kind of pay attention to what your body feels. So if today I woke up and my neck was like all like this and all hunched in. And that emotion often is associated with feeling stressed and oftentimes feeling anxiety. Now, I just get off a vacation. So I definitely am then asking, I feel anxiety. What is it trying to tell me? So that's the next exercise is paying attention to what it is, then giving it a voice. What's it trying to tell me? If it could talk, what would it say? Well, my anxiety would probably just say, I have so much to do
After coming off
and
of
so
vacation,
little time.
Yeah, the ramp up, there was no onboarding here. It was
Yeah.
like, no, stop, and then go.
And then, right?
Yeah.
So then the next question is, what does it mean to feel calmer? And so what I know that I needed this morning was to write out all the things that I feel like I need to do that are in here. I got them all out this morning. And then to be able to ground it in a truth that just says, you know what, in time, I can do the things I can do today. And then I have to trust God with the rest. And that process helped to calm
To
down
ground you?
to calm the anxiety and help my neck loosen a little bit. And so that practice, if I do that with myself, then I can move that over to my girls, my kids, and maybe to you. If I'm a really good spouse, I might do it with you and say, "Oh, I'm noticing that you seem a little upset today." And then I might ask you, what are you upset about? Why did it say? Is there anything that could comfort that or bring care? So that's kind of the growing process for all of us of making room for our emotions is first with us and then for those in our life.
Yeah, and just being a guy that used to make fun of this stuff and actually totally resistant. I mean, there's some listeners that are here that may be feeling the same way.
Oh, no.
Like it's actually good, fellas. I have learned that this is so good because I mean, I didn't even know how anxiety showed up in my body because it was just like what you know, and it was just communicating. The reality of that is communicating is how detached I was to what was going on actually in my physical body, right? So I would have nothing for breakfast and nothing for lunch and then just be famished for dinner and was totally clueless that I had missed all those meals until it was like red alert. It's going off. Learning to attune more quickly to what's happening in the physical science and emotional science and spiritual science are actually part of the journey of becoming more whole, right? And in doing that, then you can, as you learn to love the limits, live within your limits in a healthy sense, you can be more available to actually love others and serve others at home, at work, and in the community. It's actually on purpose. Once I just started to discover that and realize that was part of growing, it fit within my mode of operation, which is to wanting to grow, right, as a human and as a person, and as a father, as a husband, as a business leader. So this is good work, and but just take it from me, somebody who used to make fun of all this stuff. It actually, this is the kind of work that actually helps us to grow, to mature, to reach the end goals that we really have up front. And the how is what we're trying to help people understand at Living Wholehearted more and more, right?
Yeah. And I just have to say, because I always want to say something more, but I don't think it's just a male issue. There are a lot of women that I work with. And as Sarah was saying herself, that would disconnected from their emotions and felt like, really,
totally.
What's the point? And especially for women, we believe sometimes we don't want to be that woman, whatever that woman is in our head, who is always maybe emotional or using their emotions as a manipulation. And that's not what we're talking about. So I just wanted to equalize the playing field to say there are men who are more comfortable and have grown up in family systems where they did a good job processing their emotions and naming their emotions. And they're better at it maybe than their spouse or their colleagues.
Yeah.
So, but majority, I think men in general from our cultural upbringing and the way that our culture deals with boys. Boys don't cry is kind of the old school thinking. A lot of men are having to practice more.
It really does matter. I'm glad you said that because it matters just to the sort of the family of origin that we grew up with, right? In Sarah's example, she had a dad who hiked the Grand Canyon without training and drinking a Diet Coke, So it's like, okay, so that model impacted her ability to do hard because that's what they did in their home, right? So yeah, thinking about and tracing back, what were the messages in our home? What was modeled in our homes by our parents and our caregivers?
Yeah.
What are we modeling, actually? Not just talking about, but what are we living from the devices that are they in our hands all the time? Are they in front of
Yeah.
us all the time? What are our kids picking up that we're actually are the behaviors that we live? And how do we want to take more control in a healthy sense about those things so that we can be more whole together? We can grow, we
Yeah.
can be more free, we can experience more peace in the pacing that we're trying to model in our lives and the messages of this series in the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So I have one more thing to say. I was just talking this morning with a client, and we've been working on this accepting limits, moving identity from productivity to learning how to be more with her family, with herself. Bit of a workaholic, right? High level capacity leader. And we were just talking. She's like, it's weird. It's awkward. I feel like I accomplished nothing this last year and I don't like it. And I thought, yeah, it is a warning sign. Like, this is a new way of being and it takes time to learn. And it's new muscles that feel awkward and uncomfortable. But eventually, there's a place where it starts to become a new normal. And so this takes time. So as you're listening to the interview with Sara, as you're listening to us share about emotions and learning to accept our limits, wherever you're at on the scale of that process, just have grace for yourself and to know that to take one step forward, maybe it's ending your work day by a certain time and then moving into family time instead. Or maybe it's actually spending time working out and caring for your body. Or maybe it's time journaling. Or maybe it's actually getting that chart and putting it up on your refrigerator.
Or taking that twice a day 10-minute pause. I didn't say this to Sara but I have a client that's been doing that, and it's reaped a ton of benefits in their workday, and they're superintendent of a large school system. Yeah, it's an important thing to be able to just take one step here and respond to what God's bringing right in front of you, not to be overwhelmed by a million things, especially around this time in the new year when New Year's resolutions are so prevalent. So what's one step?
One step. And if you're interested, we do have our 2-year executive cohort starting this March. So if you're interested, applications are open. You can go to Living Wholehearted /cohort. I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but you can go to Living Wholehearted and go to the Wholehearted Leadership Cohorts, and you'll see the executive cohort application there. We would love to have you, and we love to come alongside and help you become a more wholehearted leader. Until next time, hope that you'll keep growing and becoming more the leader you'll follow.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.